Flight attendant ejected black triplet girls from first class. A few minutes later, their CEO dad terminated her. "You three need to move to the back right now." The flight attendant's voice sliced through the hum of Delta Flight 2156 like a whip crack. She stood in the aisle of first class, her face twisted with barely concealed disgust as she pointed at three 12-year-old black girls sitting peacefully in row 3. "These seats are for paying customers, not little ghetto girls playing dress-up." Sage, Skylar, and Sienna Mitchell froze mid-conversation, their excited chatter about meeting their new baby cousin dying in their throats. They sat there in their matching sundresses, yellow, pink, and blue, their carefully braided hair adorned with colorful beads that clicked softly when they moved. Their small carry-ons were tucked neatly under the seats in front of them, boarding passes clutched in trembling hands. "Ma'am, we have tickets," Sage, the oldest by 3 minutes, said quietly, holding up her boarding pass. "Our dad bought them for us. First-class seats to Phoenix." The flight attendant, her name tag read Christine Dalton, snatched the boarding passes from all three girls' hands so violently that Sienna flinched. "I don't care what these say. There's no way 3 kids like you belong in first class. Where did you steal these from? Or did someone give them to you to run some kind of scam?" Around them, first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats. A few pulled out phones, already recording. Others looked away, suddenly very interested in their overhead reading lights or the safety card in their seat pockets. Nobody spoke up. Nobody defended them. "We didn't steal anything." Skylar's voice cracked with fear and indignation. "Our Aunt Jasmine just had a baby in Phoenix. We're going to his naming ceremony. Our mom is already there, and our dad bought us these tickets because he couldn't come with us." "Your dad?" Christine laughed, sharp and cruel. "Sure he did, sweetheart. Let me guess, he's a rapper? A drug dealer? Because that's the only way people like you can afford first-class tickets." Sienna, the most sensitive of the three, started crying silently, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. Sage grabbed both her sister's hands, squeezing tight, trying to be brave even though her own heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Please, ma'am," Sage tried again, her voice smaller now. "If you just scan our tickets in your system." "I'm not scanning anything." Christine's face had gone red now, her voice rising to a pitch that made passengers in economy crane their necks to see what was happening. "You're getting off this plane, or I'm calling security to remove you. And when they get here, we'll see whose tickets these really are." A businessman in seat 2D finally spoke up. "Ma'am, those are children. Maybe you should just verify their tickets before." "Sir, I don't need a passenger telling me how to do my job." Christine spun on him, her authority challenged, her defensiveness flaring. "These girls are clearly not supposed to be here, and I'm handling it." She turned back to the triplets, her expression cold and final. "Stand up. You're moving to the back of the plane where you belong, or you're getting off entirely. Your choice." The three girls looked at each other, silent communication passing between them the way it did with siblings who'd shared a womb. They were 12 years old, flying alone for the first time, trusted by their parents to handle this trip responsibly. And now this woman was treating them like criminals, like their very existence in first class was a crime that needed correcting. "But our seats," Sienna whispered through her tears, "are not yours." Christine reached down and grabbed Sienna's arm, yanking her up from her seat with enough force that the girls stumbled into the aisle. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones everywhere now, recording, documenting, bearing witness to what was unfolding. "Don't touch my sister." Sage stood up, placing herself between Christine and Sienna, her small body shaking with fear, but her voice firm. "You have no right to touch us." Christine's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I have every right. I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and I decide who flies and who doesn't. And I've decided you three are not flying first class today." What Christine Dalton didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she stood there drunk on her tiny moment of power, was that those boarding passes she'd so dismissively snatched belonged to the daughters of Marcus Mitchell, 𝐒𝐿 of Delta Airlines. And in exactly 4 minutes, her supervisor's phone was going to ring with a call that would end her 22-year career in the most devastating way possible. Now let me ask you something that'll cut right to your soul. Have you ever watched an adult abuse their power against children and felt that sick helplessness in your gut? Ever seen someone destroy kids' joy in real time because of the color of their skin? If you think racism against 12-year-olds is just maintaining standards, if you believe staying silent protects you from getting involved, then this story isn't for you. But if you know deep in your bones that what Christine just did to Sage, Skylar, and Sienna is the exact kind of evil that thrives when good people choose comfort over courage, then you need to stay until the very end. Drop your experiences in the comments. Where and when have you witnessed this kind of hatred against children? Hit that like button if you stand against racial profiling of kids, share this video so the world can see what really happens on airplanes, and subscribe to the Hyper Racism channel because what happens in the next 4 minutes will shock you to your core. Christine Dalton has no idea whose daughters she just grabbed. And the reckoning is coming faster than she can imagine. The Mitchell triplets had been counting down to this day for 3 weeks. Ever since their Aunt Jasmine had called from Phoenix, Arizona, her voice thick with happy tears, announcing that she'd given birth to a healthy baby boy, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a head full of curly black hair and lungs that could wake the entire maternity ward. "Girls, you have to come for the naming ceremony," Jasmine had said over FaceTime, the baby swaddled in her arms. "Your mom's already here helping me, but I need my favorite nieces here too. Little Caleb needs to meet his big cousins." Sage, Skylar, and Sienna had squealed so loud their father, Marcus, had come running from his home office, thinking something was wrong. Instead, he'd found his daughters dancing around the living room of their Buckhead Atlanta mansion, already planning what gifts to bring, what outfits to wear, how they'd teach baby Caleb to smile. Marcus Mitchell had immediately pulled out his phone and booked 3 first-class tickets on Delta, the airline he'd run as CEO for the past 6 years. His wife, Nicole, was already in Phoenix, had been there for 2 weeks helping Jasmine through the final days of her pregnancy and the chaos of bringing a newborn home. Marcus had planned to fly out with the girls, make it a family trip, but back-to-back board meetings and a critical merger negotiation meant he couldn't leave Atlanta until the weekend. "Dad, we're 12 now," Sage had argued when he'd hesitated about letting them fly alone. "We're responsible. We know all the rules. And it's a direct flight, just 3 hours." Marcus had looked at his daughters, his brilliant, kind, mature beyond their years daughters, and felt that familiar tug between wanting to protect them and knowing he had to let them grow. They were honor students at the Westminster Schools, one of Atlanta's most prestigious private academies. They volunteered at the food bank every Saturday. They'd never given him or Nicole a moment of serious trouble. "Okay," he'd finally agreed. "But you stay together. You listen to the flight attendants. You call me the second you board and the second you land. And if anything feels wrong, you find an adult and ask for help." The girls had promised, had hugged him tight, had practiced their responsible traveler faces until he'd laughed despite his anxiety. Now, standing in the aisle of Delta Flight 2156 with a flight attendant who just physically grabbed Sienna, those promises felt like ash in Sage's mouth. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 757 was designed for luxury, wide leather seats that reclined into beds, ambient lighting that shifted from blue to purple, and enough legroom that even tall adults could stretch comfortably. It smelled like expensive cologne and fresh coffee, a world away from the cramped economy seats where knees pressed into seat backs and overhead bins overflowed. The Mitchell girls had been so excited to experience first class, had taken pictures of their fancy seats to send to their parents, and had already planned what movies to watch on the personal entertainment screens. Sienna had been reading the menu, excited about the warm cookies the flight attendant would bring after takeoff. Skylar had been organizing her travel journal, ready to document every moment of the trip. Sage had been texting their mom, "Boarded. Seats are amazing. See you soon." All of that joy had evaporated the moment Christine Dalton had approached their row, her eyes narrowing as she took in 3 black girls in first class, and decided, without evidence, without verification, without anything but her own prejudice, that they didn't belong there. Christine Dalton had been a flight attendant for 22 years, starting back when the job still required a certain look, a certain demeanor, a certain demographic. She'd watched the industry change over the decades, watched as diversity initiatives brought in flight attendants who didn't look like her, as passengers who didn't look like the old country club crowd started filling first class. And she'd resented every moment of it. She'd received complaints before, 3 formal ones in her personnel file, all from passengers of color who'd felt singled out, questioned more aggressively, treated with less respect than white passengers. But the complaints had been handled quietly, settled with apologies and vouchers, because Christine knew how to cry in her supervisor's office, knew how to claim she was just being thorough, just following protocols, just trying to protect the airline. Human Resources had given her warnings. Mandatory sensitivity training. A note in her file about unconscious bias. But nothing that seriously threatened her career, nothing that made her think twice about her behavior. Because the system protected her. Because passengers complained and then moved on with their lives. Because accountability was a word airlines used in press releases, not something that actually touched employees with seniority and union protection. Until today. Today, Christine Dalton had grabbed the wrong child. Had targeted the wrong family. Had let her racism override every protocol and procedure that should have protected 3 12-year-old girls from her cruelty. At Delta Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, Marcus Mitchell sat in a conference room on the 14th floor, half listening to a presentation about fuel efficiency metrics. His phone sat face up on the table in front of him, waiting for Sage's text confirming they'd landed safely. The flight wasn't supposed to take off for another 10 minutes, but he was already anxious, already second-guessing his decision to let them fly alone. His assistant Lisa knocked on the conference room door, her face pale in a way that made Marcus's stomach drop. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to step out. It's urgent. About the girls." Marcus was out of his seat before she finished the sentence, his heart already racing. "What happened? Are they okay? Is there an accident?" "They're physically okay, but..." Lisa pulled up something on her tablet, her hands shaking slightly. "Sir, there's a situation on their flight. A flight attendant is trying to remove them from first class. One of the passengers started live-streaming it on TikTok. It's already going viral." She turned the tablet toward him, and Marcus watched his daughters on the screen, Sienna crying, Sage trying to protect her sisters, Skylar looking terrified, while Christine Dalton loomed over them, her face contorted with anger and disgust. The sound was clear enough to hear Christine's words, "Girls like you don't belong in first class." Marcus's vision tunneled. His hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white. Around him, the other executives in the conference room had gone silent, some looking at the tablet, others looking at Marcus with dawning horror. "Get me flight operations," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm in a way that made Lisa step back. "Get me the captain of Flight 2156. Get me Phoenix Airport security. And get me Christine Dalton's complete employment file. I want it all. Right now." He was already walking toward his office, already pulling up the airline's internal systems on his phone, already accessing the live cabin camera feeds that every Delta aircraft had installed. He found Flight 2156, Gate B7, still at the gate. Pulled up the first-class camera. And there were his babies. His brilliant, sweet, innocent daughters were being terrorized by an employee who wore his airline's uniform, who represented his company, who was creating trauma that would live in his children's memories forever. Marcus Mitchell had spent 6 years building Delta's reputation. 6 years of implementing diversity initiatives and sensitivity training and zero-tolerance policies for discrimination. 6 years believing that the systems he'd put in place were working, were protecting passengers, were creating a culture of respect. And in 3 minutes of watching that video, he just learned how catastrophically those systems had failed. His phone was already ringing, operations, legal, customer service, all trying to reach him simultaneously. But Marcus ignored them all. He had one call to make first. He dialed the cockpit of Flight 2156 directly, using the emergency override code that only C-suite executives had access to. Captain James Washington answered on the first ring. "This is Captain Washington." "James, it's Marcus Mitchell. Do not let that flight take off. I don't care if you're cleared for pushback. Do not move that aircraft. There was a pause. Sir, we're third in line for a taxi. Is there a mechanical issue? There's a flight attendant issue. Christine Dalton is in the process of ejecting my daughters from first class. And I'm about to come down there and handle this personally. Another pause, longer this time. Marcus could hear the captain processing that information, understanding that the CEO's children were on his flight, that a discrimination incident was unfolding in his cabin, that his career was potentially on the line depending on how he handled the next 5 minutes. Understood, sir. Returning to the gate now. Marcus grabbed his car keys, already heading for the elevator. His office was 23 minutes from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. He was going to make it in 15. And Christine Dalton was about to learn that some children had fathers who could move mountains, who could ground planes, who could end careers with a phone call. She'd picked the wrong girls to terrorize. And the next 15 minutes were going to prove it. Back on Flight 2156, Christine Dalton was still gripping Sienna's arm, her fingers digging into the 12-year-old's skin hard enough to leave marks. The other passengers watched with growing discomfort as the situation spiraled, but still, nobody physically intervened. They recorded. They whispered. But they didn't act. Let go of my sister. Sage's voice was firmer now, louder, pulling from some deep reserve of courage she didn't know she had. You're hurting her. Christine's grip only tightened. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal first-class seats. Now, all three of you are moving, or security is dragging you off this plane in handcuffs. What's it going to be? Skylar, who'd been silent until now, pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I'm calling our dad. He'll straighten this out. He'll tell you we're supposed to be here. Go ahead and call whoever you want, Christine sneered. By the time anyone answers, you'll be in the terminal explaining to police why you have fraudulent boarding passes. But Skylar wasn't calling their father. She was texting him, her fingers flying across the screen through her tears. Dad, help. The flight attendant says our tickets are fake. She won't let us sit in first class. She grabbed Sienna. Everyone is just watching. Please help us. The message was sent. Then another. And another. Skylar's panic translated into a stream of consciousness texts that painted a picture of 3 terrified children being accused of crimes they hadn't committed. Put the phone away, Christine demanded, reaching for it. But Skylar pulled back, clutching it to her chest. No. I'm texting my parents. You can't take my phone. I can and I will if you don't cooperate. Christine's face had gone from red to purple now, her authority challenged by children who wouldn't simply submit to her demands. Other flight attendants hovered nearby, uncertain, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict their senior colleague. A flight attendant named Maria, younger and visibly distressed, approached carefully. Christine, maybe we should just scan their boarding passes? Verify in the system before we... I don't need to scan anything, Maria. Christine snapped. I can see with my own eyes these girls don't belong here. Now either help me move them or get out of my way. Maria backed off, her face troubled but her mouth closed. Later, she would regret that silence. Would replay this moment in her mind 1,000 times, wondering why she didn't push harder, didn't override Christine, didn't protect 3 children who desperately needed protecting. The captain's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom, calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. We'll be returning to the gate momentarily. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Confusion rippled through the cabin. They'd been cleared for taxi, were third in line for takeoff. Why were they going back? Christine's confidence wavered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. But she pushed it aside, convinced she was right, convinced she was protecting the airline, convinced these children were trying to pull something over on her. Fine, she said, releasing Sienna's arm but pointing a finger at all 3 girls. When we get back to the gate, security will be waiting. And they'll verify what I already know, that you 3 have no business being in first class. Sage wrapped her arms around Sienna, who was sobbing openly now. Skylar kept her phone clutched tight, watching the screen for their father's response. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, some clearly wanting to help but paralyzed by uncertainty, by the fear of making things worse, by the deeply ingrained instinct to defer to authority even when authority was clearly wrong. The plane reversed course, heading back toward Gate B7. Through the window, the girls could see other aircraft taxiing past, taking off, passengers heading to their destinations, while their own journey had been derailed by nothing more than the color of their skin. "What are we going to do?" Sienna whispered to Sage, her voice small and broken. "What if they really call the police? What if they arrest us?" "They won't," Sage said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Because we didn't do anything wrong. Dad will fix this. He always fixes things." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Their father was in Atlanta, hours away. They were alone, surrounded by adults who seemed determined to believe the worst about them, in a situation spiraling further out of control with every passing second. The plane docked at the gate with a mechanical thunk. The jetway connected. And through the aircraft door came 2 airport security officers, their faces serious, their presence making everything suddenly feel very real and very frightening. Christine smiled, vindicated. "Officers, these 3 girls are in first-class seats with what I believe to be fraudulent boarding passes. I need you to verify their tickets and remove them from the aircraft." The lead security officer, a middle-aged black man named Officer Thompson, looked at the 3 terrified 12-year-olds, and something in his expression softened. "Girls, can I see your boarding passes and IDs?" Sage handed them over with trembling fingers. Officer Thompson examined them carefully, then pulled out his scanner. He ran each boarding pass through it, his face neutral, giving nothing away. Beep. Green light. Valid. Beep. Green light. Valid. Beep. Green light. Valid. Officer Thompson looked up at Christine, and his tone had changed, gone harder. "Ma'am, these boarding passes are completely legitimate. First-class seats, properly paid for and assigned." The color drained from Christine's face. "That's impossible. Let me see that scanner." "Step back, ma'am," Officer Thompson said firmly. He turned to the girls, his voice gentle. "Can you tell me who purchased these tickets for you?" "Our dad," Skylar said quietly. "Marcus Mitchell. He's the—" She was interrupted by a commotion at the aircraft door. Someone was pushing past the gate agents, moving with purpose and authority that made people instinctively step aside. Marcus Mitchell appeared in the doorway of first class, still in his suit from the board meeting, his face a mask of controlled fury that made the temperature in the cabin seem to drop 10 degrees. His eyes found his daughters immediately, Sienna's tear-stained face, Sage's protective stance, Skylar's death grip on her phone, and something cracked in his carefully maintained composure. Then his gaze shifted to Christine Dalton, and everyone in that cabin understood they were about to witness something they'd never forget. Have you ever watched someone's world change in an instant? Seen the exact moment when a bully realizes they've picked the wrong target? Christine Dalton was about to learn that not all children are powerless, not all parents are too far away to help, and not all consequences can be avoided with tears and apologies. "Daddy!" 3 voices cried out in unison as Sage, Skylar, and Sienna launched themselves at Marcus Mitchell. He caught all 3 of them, pulling them into his arms despite his 6'2" frame being in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about the board meeting he'd walked out of. He didn't care about anything except his daughters, who were trembling against him like leaves in a storm. "I've got you," Marcus whispered into their hair, his voice breaking in a way his employees had never heard. "Daddy's got you. You're safe now." Christine Dalton stood frozen at the front of first class, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She looked at Marcus, then at the girls, then at Officer Thompson, trying to piece together what was happening, why a man in an expensive suit had just been allowed to rush onto her aircraft. "Sir, you can't be here," Christine finally found her voice, falling back on protocol even as her instincts screamed that something was very wrong. "This is a secure area. You need to return to the gate immediately." Marcus slowly released his daughters, making sure they were steady before he straightened to his full height. When he turned to face Christine, his expression was so cold it could have frozen fire. "My name is Marcus Mitchell," he said quietly, but his voice carried through the entire first-class cabin like thunder. "And I'm the CEO of Delta Airlines." The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers gasped. Maria, the other flight attendant, went pale as a ghost. Officer Thompson closed his eyes briefly, as if he'd suspected but hoped he was wrong. Anne Christine Dalton's face cycled through emotions so rapidly it was almost comical. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, absolute horror. Christine's voice came out as barely a whisper. "You're Marcus Mitchell?" "I'm Marcus Mitchell. And these are my daughters, Sage, Skylar, and Sienna." His voice was still quiet, still controlled, but underneath it ran a current of rage so powerful it made the air feel electric. "The 12-year-old girls you just physically assaulted, accused of fraud, and attempted to remove from first-class seats that I personally purchased for them. I didn't know, I couldn't have known," Christine's words tumbled out in a panic. "You didn't know they were my daughters," Marcus interrupted, taking a step closer. "So that's your defense? That you only terrorize black children when you don't know their father has power?" "That's not what I meant. The boarding passes looked suspicious." "Officer Thompson," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off Christine, "did those boarding passes look suspicious to you?" "No, sir," Officer Thompson said firmly. "They were valid Delta first-class tickets. Properly purchased, assigned. Nothing suspicious about them at all." "Then what, specifically, made you think my daughters didn't belong in these seats?" Marcus's question hung in the air like a noose. "Walk me through your thought process. 3 12-year-old girls, well-dressed, polite, with valid boarding passes. What triggered your immediate assumption of fraud?" Christine's mouth opened and closed. Around them, phones were still recording, capturing every moment of this confrontation. The TikTok live stream that had started during the initial incident now had over 50,000 viewers, all watching a CEO confront an employee who'd targeted his children. "I was following protocol," Christine stammered. "We're supposed to verify suspicious passengers." "What was suspicious about them?" Marcus pressed. "Their clothes? Their behavior? Or was it something else? Something you don't want to say out loud in front of all these cameras?" The implication was clear. Everyone in that cabin knew exactly what had made Christine suspicious. Everyone watching the live stream knew. There was no hiding from it, no corporate language that could sanitize the truth. Christine had seen 3 black girls in first class and immediately assumed they didn't belong there. That was the beginning and end of it. Everything else, the refusal to scan tickets, the accusations of fraud, the physical assault, had flowed from that one racist assumption. "Mr. Mitchell, please," Christine's voice cracked, tears starting to stream down her face. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what?" Marcus cut her off. "You didn't mean to grab my 12-year-old daughter hard enough to leave marks on her arm? You didn't mean to make her cry? You didn't mean to make all 3 of my children feel like criminals for having the audacity to sit in seats they had every right to occupy." He turned to Sienna, gently lifting her arm to show the red fingerprints Christine's grip had left. Several passengers gasped. Maria looked like she might be sick. "You did this," Marcus said, his voice shaking now with the effort of maintaining control. "To a child. To my child. Because you looked at her skin and decided she was a threat." Captain Washington had appeared in the cockpit doorway, his face grave. "Mr. Mitchell, sir. I apologize for not intervening sooner. I was informed of the situation, but—" "Captain Washington, you're not at fault here," Marcus said, though his eyes never left Christine. "You returned to the gate as soon as I called. You did what you could." He turned to Maria, who was openly crying now. "You tried to suggest scanning the tickets, didn't you?" Maria nodded miserably. "I did, sir. But Christine is my senior, and I thought—" "You thought she knew better," Marcus finished. "You deferred to her authority even when your instincts told you she was wrong. That's a failure of courage, Maria, but it's a failure I can understand. You were afraid to stand up to a senior colleague. That's human." He looked back at Christine. "But what you did? There's no excuse for that." Christine had collapsed into a nearby seat, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Please, Mr. Mitchell. I need this job. I have a mortgage. I have bills. I'll apologize to your daughters. I'll take any training you want. Please don't fire me." Marcus crouched down in front of his daughters, taking their hands. "Girls, Ms. Dalton wants to apologize. Do you want to hear it?" The three of them looked at each other, that silent triplet communication that never needed words. Then Sage spoke for all of them, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "We don't want her apology, Daddy. We want her to never do this to anyone else. Because the next 3 black girls she targets might not have a father who can ground the plane. And they deserve protection too." Pride and heartbreak warred on Marcus's face. His 12-year-old daughter had just articulated what he'd been feeling since he saw that live stream, that this wasn't just about his family. It was about every black child who'd faced discrimination and had no recourse, no power, no father with the authority to make it right. He stood up, looking at Christine one last time. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Officer Thompson will escort you off the aircraft and ensure you turn in your badge and credentials." "No, please. You can't do this." Christine's voice rose to a wail. "I can and I am," Marcus said flatly. "And Ms. Dalton? I'm going to make sure every airline in this industry knows exactly why you were fired. You won't work in aviation again." He turned to Captain Washington. "Get my daughter's luggage. They're not flying on this aircraft. I'm taking them to Phoenix myself. On my private jet. Because they've been traumatized enough for one day, and I'm not putting them back in an environment where they were terrorized." "Understood, sir." As security escorted a sobbing Christine Dalton off the aircraft, the passengers who'd witnessed everything, who'd recorded everything, began to applaud. Slowly at first, then building to thunderous approval. But Marcus didn't feel victorious. He felt sick. Because he'd saved his daughters, but he hadn't saved all the others who'd suffered before them, who'd filed complaints that went nowhere, who'd been gaslit and dismissed and told they were being too sensitive. And as he led Sage, Skylar, and Sienna off Flight 2156, he knew this was just the beginning. Because tomorrow he was going to tear through Delta's HR records and find out how many other Christine Daltons were out there, still working, still discriminating, still protected by a system that prioritized employee retention over passenger safety. And he was going to burn that system to the ground. As security led Christine Dalton down the jetway, she suddenly wrenched herself free from Officer Thompson's grip and spun around, her desperation transforming into something uglier. Something dangerous. "This is discrimination." Christine's voice echoed through the terminal, drawing attention from travelers at neighboring gates. "You're firing me because I'm white. Because I dared to question 3 black passengers. This is reverse racism." Marcus had been walking his daughters toward the gate entrance, but he stopped, turned, and the look on his face made even Officer Thompson take a step back. "Say that again," Marcus said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Say that one more time." Christine's lawyer brain should have told her to stop. Her survival instincts should have screamed at her to shut up, to take the termination and go quietly. But 22 years of facing no real consequences for her actions had built up a confidence that was now crumbling into panic, and panic made people reckless. "You're targeting me because of my race." Christine doubled down, her voice rising. "I was doing my job. I was following security protocols. And now you're abusing your power as CEO to protect your daughters from legitimate scrutiny." A crowd was gathering now. Passengers from other flights. Gate agents. Airport staff. People with phones out, recording, adding to the viral moment that was already trending on multiple social media platforms. "Legitimate scrutiny," Marcus repeated, his voice still quiet but carrying through the crowd like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "You grabbed my 12-year-old daughter hard enough to bruise her. You refused to scan valid boarding passes. You accused 3 children of fraud with 0 evidence. That's your definition of legitimate scrutiny. They fit a profile." Christine blurted out, and the moment the words left her mouth, she knew she'd made a catastrophic mistake. "A profile?" Marcus said. "What profile is that, Ms. Dalton? Please, explain to everyone here what profile 3 well-dressed 12-year-old girls in matching sundresses fit." Christine's face went from red to white. I didn't mean that came out wrong. No, it came out exactly right, Marcus interrupted. You said what you actually think. That black children fit a criminal profile. That their skin color alone is sufficient cause for suspicion, for harassment, for physical assault. He took a step closer to her, and his voice dropped even lower. How many other black passengers have you done this to, Miss Dalton? How many complaints are buried in your file that I'm about to dig up? None. I've never, Christine was crying again, mascara running down her face, but these weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a person watching their entire life collapse and grasping at anything to stop the fall. This isn't fair. You're destroying my career over one misunderstanding. One misunderstanding? Sage spoke up, her young voice cutting through Christine's protests. You called us ghetto. You said we didn't belong in first class because people like us couldn't afford it. You asked if our dad was a drug dealer. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racism. Several people in the crowd murmured agreement. A black woman with a Delta uniform, another flight attendant, stepped forward. Sir, if I may, she addressed Marcus, her voice shaking but determined. I've worked with Christine for 8 years. I've watched her treat passengers of color differently. I've heard the comments she makes in the crew lounge. I reported her twice to HR, and nothing happened. They told me it was a difference in customer service approach, and gave her sensitivity training. What's your name? Marcus asked. Jennifer Morris, sir. I'm based out of Atlanta. Marcus pulled out his phone, typing notes. Jennifer, I want you to document everything. Every incident you witnessed. Every complaint you filed. Every time HR dismissed your concerns. Email it directly to me. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Jennifer said, relief flooding her face. Thank you for finally listening. I should have been listening all along, Marcus said, and the regret in his voice was genuine. That's on me. Christine saw other flight attendants in the crowd, some nodding, some looking uncomfortable. Her world was fracturing in real time, her colleagues turning against her, witnesses coming forward with stories she'd thought were safely buried. You're all lying. Christine screamed, losing whatever composure she had left. You're all ganging up on me because he's making you. Because he has power and you want to stay on his good side. None of this is true. Then explain this, a male voice called out. A passenger from Flight 2156, the businessman from Seat 2D, stepped forward with his phone. I have the entire interaction recorded. From the moment you approached those girls to the moment Mr. Mitchell arrived. Should we play it for everyone? Christine lunged toward him, trying to grab his phone. Delete that. You have no right to record me. Officer Thompson caught her arm, pulling her back. Ma'am, you need to calm down. You're in a public space. Recording is legal. This is a witch hunt. Christine was completely unhinged now, her voice hoarse from screaming. You're all trying to destroy me. I was just doing my job. I was protecting this airline. You were terrorizing children, Marcus said, and the steel in his voice made Christine flinch. And now you're threatening passengers who documented your behavior. Officer Thompson, add assault and disorderly conduct to the incident report. No, I didn't assault anyone. I barely touched that girl. Christine gestured wildly toward Sienna, who shrank back against her father. She's just being dramatic. They're all being dramatic because they know they can get away with it. The crowd gasped. Even the passengers who'd been silent before, who'd been uncomfortable but unwilling to take sides, couldn't ignore that. Christine had just called 3 12-year-old girls dramatic for being upset about being racially profiled and physically grabbed. Get her out of here, Marcus said to Officer Thompson, his voice final. And make sure airport security has copies of all the videos. I want a complete record of this incident. As Christine was led away, this time with a firmer grip, her protests echoing down the terminal, Marcus turned to the crowd that had gathered. I want to say something to everyone here, he began, and people quieted, phones still recording. What you witnessed today was not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of systemic racism that exists throughout the airline industry. My daughters got justice because I have power. But how many black passengers, how many black children, experience this same treatment and have no recourse? He looked at his daughters, who were watching him with a mixture of pride and pain. I'm ashamed that it took my own children being targeted for me to truly see how deep this problem runs. But I promise you this, it ends now. Not just at Delta, but industry-wide if I have anything to say about it. A reporter from a local news station had arrived, camera rolling. Mr. Mitchell, what specific changes will Delta implement? Everything, Marcus said simply. Zero-tolerance policies with actual enforcement. Independent review boards for discrimination complaints. Public reporting of incidents. And partnerships with civil rights organizations to rebuild a culture that clearly failed today. But even as he spoke, even as people applauded, even as his daughters held his hands tight, Marcus knew the real battle was just beginning. Because Christine Dalton wasn't done. She was humiliated, unemployed, and going viral for all the wrong reasons. And people that desperate, that cornered, that convinced of their own victimhood, they were capable of anything. As Marcus led his girls toward his private hangar, his phone buzzed with a text from his head of security. Sir, Christine Dalton just posted on Facebook that she's going to sue you, Delta, and your daughters for defamation and emotional distress. She's claiming this is all a setup. It's already being shared in airline employee groups and conservative media outlets. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion and anger warring inside him. This woman had terrorized his children, and now she was trying to paint herself as the victim. The question was, how far would Christine Dalton go to destroy the family she blamed for her downfall? Marcus Mitchell's private jet took off from Atlanta 90 minutes later, carrying 3 shell-shocked 12-year-olds, their father, and a level of media attention that was growing exponentially by the hour. By the time they reached cruising altitude, #Christine Dalton was trending #1 worldwide, and the videos had been viewed over 30 million times. But Christine wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. From her apartment in suburban Atlanta, Christine had spent the last hour crafting a narrative on social media that painted her as the victim of corporate overreach and reverse discrimination. Her Facebook post, written in the breathless style of someone convinced of their own martyrdom, had already been shared 15,000 times. I was fired today for doing my job. For following security protocols. For asking questions that any diligent employee would ask. But because the passengers I questioned were black, and because their father happens to be the CEO of Delta Airlines, I'm being destroyed. My 22-year career is over. My reputation is ruined. All because I dared to treat everyone equally, regardless of race. This is what happens in America now. White people are targets. We can't even do our jobs without being accused of racism. I will be filing a lawsuit against Marcus Mitchell, his daughters, and Delta Airlines for defamation, wrongful termination, and emotional distress. The truth will come out. The post had found its audience. People who wanted to believe that accountability for racism was itself racist. People who saw any consequence for discriminatory behavior as persecution. Conservative news outlets picked it up within an hour. Cable news pundits debated whether Marcus had abused his power. Online forums dissected every frame of the video, looking for evidence that Christine had been justified. But they couldn't escape the footage. It was too clear. Too damning. Marcus's phone rang as the plane approached Phoenix. It was his chief legal counsel, Patricia Wong. Marcus, we need to talk strategy, Patricia said without preamble. Christine's attorney just sent a demand letter. They're claiming $50 million in damages and demanding a public apology from you and the girls. They're alleging that you orchestrated a social media campaign to destroy her life. $50 million, Marcus repeated flatly. For terrorizing my children. They're claiming she was following standard procedures and that you retaliated because of your daughter's race, not hers. They're trying to flip the script completely. Marcus looked at his daughters, who were finally sleeping after the trauma of the day, curled up in the plane's leather seats with blankets tucked around them. Sienna still had marks on her arm. Skylar clutched her phone even in sleep. Sage's face, even relaxed, carried new lines of stress that hadn't been there this morning. Patricia, I want you to do something for me, Marcus said quietly. I want you to pull every single complaint filed against Christine Dalton in her 22 years with Delta. I want interviews with every employee who's worked with her. I want statements from passengers who she's mistreated. And I want all of it released publicly, simultaneously with our response to her lawsuit. Marcus, that's scorched earth. If we release employee records publicly, even with cause, it sets a precedent that could. I don't care about precedent, Marcus interrupted. I care about the truth. Christine wants to claim she was just doing her job? Fine. Let's show the world what her job actually looked like for the last 2 decades. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You're sure about this? Once we release that information, there's no taking it back. It'll dominate news cycles. It'll overshadow everything else Delta does for months. Good, Marcus said. Because maybe if it dominates news cycles, other airlines will finally address their own Christine Daltons. Maybe if we shine enough light on this problem, it'll become too painful to ignore anymore. By the time Marcus's plane landed in Phoenix, Delta's legal team had compiled a file that was staggering in its scope. 22 years of complaints. 47 formal incidents, including 12 that had been settled with non-disclosure agreements and financial payouts to passengers who'd been racially profiled, verbally abused, or physically intimidated. Countless informal complaints from fellow employees about Christine's racist comments in crew lounges, her refusal to serve certain passengers with the same courtesy she showed others, and her pattern of losing upgrade requests from passengers with ethnic-sounding names. The next morning, as Christine Dalton appeared on Fox News to tell her side of the story, tearful, defiant, claiming she was the real victim of racism, Delta Airlines held a press conference that would change the conversation forever. Patricia Wong stood at the podium, flanked by employment law experts and civil rights attorneys. Behind her, a screen displayed documents, emails, and complaint forms, all meticulously organized and redacted only to protect the identities of victims. Christine Dalton claimed she was fired for doing her job. Patricia began, her voice steady and professional. Let me show you what her job actually looked like. The documents scrolled across the screen. Complaint after complaint. A passenger in 2015 who'd been accused of stealing a first-class ticket because he was black, settled for $25,000 and an NDA. A family in 2018 who'd been removed from a flight after Christine claimed their children were unruly. Cell phone video showed the children sitting quietly, but the footage had never been reviewed because HR closed the case with a warning letter. An Asian businessman in 2020 who'd been subjected to COVID-related slurs and told to move to the back of the plane, settled for $50,000 and an NDA. The patterns were undeniable. Overwhelming. Damning. Ms. Dalton has filed a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination and defamation, Patricia continued. Delta Airlines welcomes this lawsuit because it will allow us to present all of this evidence in open court, under oath, where Ms. Dalton will have to explain each of these incidents under penalty of perjury. The press conference lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Christine's narrative had collapsed completely. The conservative outlets that had championed her cause quietly pulled their stories. Her attorney called Patricia Wong before the day was over, requesting to withdraw the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning Christine could never file it again. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just defeating the lawsuit. He'd promised his daughters that Christine would never do this to anyone else, and he intended to keep that promise. That evening, standing in his sister Jasmine's living room in Phoenix, holding his newborn nephew Caleb while his daughters cooed over the baby, Marcus made an announcement that would reshape the entire airline industry. Effective immediately, Delta will be implementing the Mitchell Protocol, named after my daughters, who should never have needed their father's power to get justice. Every discrimination complaint will be reviewed by an independent board. Every passenger who signed an NDA in a discrimination settlement will be released from that agreement and offered additional compensation. And every employee with multiple substantiated complaints will face immediate termination, regardless of seniority or union protection. He looked at Sage, Skylar, and Sienna, who were watching him with eyes that had aged years in a single day. You asked that Christine never do this to anyone else. She won't. But we're going to make sure none of the other Christine Daltons out there can either. Within a week, United Airlines announced similar policies. Then American. Then Southwest. The Mitchell Protocol became an industry standard, not because airlines wanted to implement it, but because the viral videos of 3 12-year-old girls being terrorized had created a public relations crisis no company could afford to ignore. Christine Dalton, meanwhile, had disappeared from social media entirely. Her lawsuit withdrawn, her reputation destroyed, her industry connections severed, she'd become a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when institutional racism finally meets accountability. But as Marcus watched his daughters play with baby Caleb, teaching him to grab their fingers, singing to him in soft voices, he knew the victory was bittersweet. They'd gotten justice, but they'd lost something too, a certain innocence, a belief that being polite and following rules would always protect them from hatred. They'd learned what every black child eventually learns, that the world would judge them by their skin before their character. And that knowledge, once gained, could never be unlearned. But they'd also learned something else. That their voices mattered. That speaking up could create change. That even when systems failed them, they had the power to demand better. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson would be enough to sustain them through all the other Christine Daltons they'd inevitably encounter in their lives. The question was, would the changes stick, or would this be just another moment of corporate performative activism that faded as soon as the cameras turned off? Only time would tell. 3 weeks after the incident, the full weight of consequences had crashed down on Christine Dalton's life with devastating completeness. She sat in her Atlanta apartment, the same apartment she'd soon lose because she couldn't make the mortgage payment, scrolling through news articles about herself with trembling hands. Former Delta flight attendant becomes face of airline discrimination scandal. Christine Dalton's 22-year pattern of racist behavior exposed. Airlines across America implement Mitchell Protocol after viral incident. Her phone rang constantly with numbers she didn't recognize, reporters, mostly, but also angry strangers who'd somehow found her personal information. Her social media accounts, once filled with vacation photos and inspirational quotes, had been deleted after the death threats became too much to handle. Her friends had stopped calling. Her neighbors avoided eye contact in the hallway. The lawsuit she'd filed had been withdrawn, her attorney explaining that proceeding would only make things worse, would open her up to discovery that would expose even more incidents she'd thought were safely buried. The settlement she'd hoped for, some financial cushion to survive unemployment, had evaporated along with her reputation. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Her own daughter, Emily, a sophomore at Georgia State University, had posted an open letter that went viral in its own right. "My mother, Christine Dalton, is the woman you've seen in those videos. The one who grabbed those little girls. The one who called them ghetto and accused them of fraud. And I need you to know, I'm not surprised. This is who she's always been, just usually behind closed doors. Growing up, I heard her make racist comments about our neighbors, our teachers, and kids at my school. She taught me to clutch my purse tighter around black people. She told me certain neighborhoods were dangerous, which was code for non-white. I spent my teenage years unlearning her hatred. And now, watching her face the consequences for the first time in her life, I feel relieved. Not for her pain, but because maybe, finally, she'll understand that her views aren't just being honest or telling it like it is. They're racism. Plain and simple. To the Mitchell family, I'm sorry. You deserved better. Those girls deserved better." The letter had millions of views. It had been featured on Good Morning America. Emily had been interviewed by major news outlets, becoming a symbol of generational change, of children rejecting their parents' bigotry. Christine had tried to call her daughter 17 times. Emily hadn't answered once. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family had become advocates in a way Marcus never intended but couldn't avoid. Sage, Skylar, and Sienna had done interviews with CNN, NPR, and Teen Vogue, speaking about their experience with a maturity that broke hearts and inspired action. They'd testified via video conference to a congressional committee examining discrimination in the airline industry. They'd met with the NAACP, with the Urban League, with organizations dedicated to protecting children from racism. "We don't want to be famous for this," Skylar had told a reporter. We just want other kids to know they're not alone. If this happens to them, they should speak up. That their voices matter. The naming ceremony for baby Caleb had become a family healing moment. Aunt Jasmine had held the girls close, letting them take turns cradling their new cousin, reminding them that joy still existed even after trauma. Nicole, their mother, had flown back from Phoenix with them, spending every night for a week talking through their feelings, helping them process what had happened. But Marcus knew his daughters had changed. He saw it in small ways, how Sage tensed up when they approached airport security now, even though they were recognized and waved through. How Skylar documented everything on her phone, just in case she needed evidence again. How Sienna asked before entering any new space, "Do we belong here, Daddy?" That question, "Do we belong here?" haunted Marcus more than anything else. Because the answer should have been obvious. His daughters belonged everywhere. But Christine Dalton and people like her had planted a seed of doubt that might take years to uproot. The Mitchell Protocol had been implemented across Delta's entire operation. In the first 2 weeks, 14 employees had been terminated for discrimination violations that investigation teams uncovered. 23 more were suspended pending review. The Independent Oversight Board had received over 300 complaints from passengers who'd previously stayed silent, who'd been waiting for a system that would actually listen. Other airlines, initially resistant, had been forced to follow Delta's lead as consumer pressure mounted. Boycott threats. Viral social media campaigns. Shareholders are demanding action to protect stock prices. Within a month, American, United, Southwest, and JetBlue had all announced similar protocols. The industry was changing measurably and substantially because 3 12-year-old girls had refused to accept discrimination as normal. But the personal cost lingered. Marcus sat with his daughters one evening in their Buckhead home, a month after the incident, watching them do homework at the kitchen table. They seemed okay on the surface, laughing at inside jokes, helping each other with math problems, planning their next visit to see baby Caleb. But he'd found Sienna crying in her room 2 nights ago, having a nightmare about being dragged off a plane. He'd heard Sage on the phone with her school counselor, talking through anxiety that hadn't existed before. He'd watched Skylar obsessively research discrimination cases, as if understanding the pattern could protect her from experiencing it again. "Girls," Marcus said, closing his laptop. "I want to talk about something." They looked up, immediately attentive. They'd always been close as a family, but the incident had brought a new intensity to their bond. "I've been thinking about what happened with Ms. Dalton," Marcus began carefully. "And I want you to know, what she did was wrong. Completely, unquestionably wrong. But I also want you to understand that her losing her job, her reputation, her daughter's respect, that doesn't undo what she did to you." "We know, Dad," Sage said quietly. "Justice doesn't erase trauma." Marcus felt his throat tighten. His 12-year-old shouldn't have to know that. But she did. They all did now. "I also want you to know that you don't have to be spokespeople if you don't want to," he continued. "You don't have to do interviews or testify or carry the weight of changing an entire industry. That's too much for kids to carry." "But if we don't," Skylar said, her voice thoughtful, "then what happened to us doesn't mean anything. It's just another bad thing that happened. But if we talk about it, if we help make changes, then maybe it will protect the next 3 girls. The ones who don't have a CEO dad." "That's very mature thinking," Nicole said, her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "But your father's right. You're 12. You should be worried about homework and friends, and which movie to watch this weekend. Not congressional testimonies and civil rights advocacy." "Mom, we're not just 12 anymore," Sienna said, and the sadness in her voice broke something in both parents. Christine Dalton made sure of that. "We can't unknow what we know now. We can't unsee how people look at us differently because of our skin. So we might as well use it to help people." Marcus pulled all 3 of his daughters into his arms, fighting tears. They were right, and that was the tragedy of it. They'd been forced to grow up too fast, to understand racism's mechanics before they'd even finished middle school. But they were also choosing to transform that forced education into purpose. And maybe that was the only way forward, not pretending the trauma hadn't happened, but deciding what it would mean going forward. "Okay," Marcus said. But we do it as a family. And the moment it becomes too much, we stop. Deal? Deal, they said in unison. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Marcus received an email from an unexpected source. The subject line read, "From Christine Dalton." His finger hovered over the delete button. He didn't owe this woman anything. Didn't need to hear her excuses or justifications or pleas for forgiveness. But something made him open it. The email was short, typed with obvious haste and emotion. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see the pattern of my whole life. My daughter won't speak to me. My friends have abandoned me. I've lost everything. And I deserve it. But your daughters don't deserve to carry what I put on them. Please tell them I'm sorry. Not because I want anything from them. I know I'm beyond redemption. But because they deserve to hear it. What I did was racism. Pure and simple. And I'm ashamed it took losing everything for me to finally admit it. I hope they heal. I hope they know they were right and I was wrong. And I hope other children never experience what I put them through. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Marcus read it twice. Then a third time. He didn't know if Christine's contrition was genuine or just another performance, motivated by loss rather than actual change of heart. But he saved the email. Because someday, when his daughters were ready, he'd let them decide whether Christine Dalton's apology meant anything. And maybe, just maybe, that choice would give them back some of the power Christine had tried to take away. Have you ever wondered what real accountability looks like? Not performative apologies or corporate PR statements, but actual consequences that fundamentally change someone's life? Christine Dalton lost her career, her reputation, her daughter's respect, everything. Some people say that's too harsh, that she deserves a second chance. But what about the people she harmed over 22 years? What about the 3 12-year-old girls who will carry this trauma forever? Where's the balance between redemption and justice? 6 months after Flight 2156, Sage, Skylar, and Sienna Mitchell stood in their middle school auditorium, presenting their final project for social studies class. The assignment was to research a current event and analyze its impact on society. Most students had chosen topics from textbooks or distant news stories. The Mitchell triplets chose to present about what happened to them. Discrimination doesn't just hurt in the moment, Sage told the audience of students, teachers, and parents. It changes how you see the world forever. Before that flight, I thought that if we were polite and followed rules, we'd be safe. Now I know that's not true. Some people will see our skin before they see anything else. Skylar pulled up statistics on the screen behind them, the 47 complaints against Christine, the hundreds more that emerged industry-wide after the Mitchell Protocol was implemented, the measurable increase in discrimination reports as passengers felt safe speaking up. But here's what we learned, Skylar continued. Silence protects oppressors. Speaking up protects everyone else. When we told our story, other people found the courage to tell theirs. That's how change happens. Sienna, who'd been the most traumatized, spoke last. We didn't ask to become advocates. We just wanted to see our baby cousin. But Christine Dalton's racism forced us to grow up faster than we should have. So we decided to make it mean something. To use our voice so other kids don't have to suffer in silence. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. But more importantly, 5 students approached them afterward to share their own experiences with discrimination, stories they'd been carrying alone until they saw someone else speak first. That's how movements grow. One voice becoming many. One story breaking the silence. One act of courage inspiring thousands more. 1 year after the incident, Marcus Mitchell stood backstage at the NAACP Image Awards, watching his daughters accept the Youth Leadership Award for their advocacy work. Sage, Skylar, and Sienna had spent the last 12 months turning their trauma into purpose, speaking at schools, consulting with airlines on youth-friendly complaint systems, and creating a foundation to support children who experience discrimination. They were 13 now, taller, more confident, but still carrying scars that would never fully heal. Marcus saw it in the way they tensed during airport security, in the nightmares Sienna still had occasionally, in the hypervigilance that had become their new normal. But he also saw resilience, courage, a determination that discrimination would not define them, it would refine them. "We didn't choose to become voices for change," Skylar said into the microphone, her words broadcast to millions. "But once we found our voice, we couldn't stay silent. Because somewhere tonight, another black child is being treated like we were treated. And they need to know they're not alone. They need to know their voices matter. They need to know that speaking up can change systems." The camera panned to Christine Dalton's daughter, Emily, in the audience, applauding, tears streaming down her face. She'd become an ally, using her platform to discuss how white families must actively unlearn racism passed down through generations. Christine herself had disappeared from public life entirely. Some said she was working retail under a different name. Others claimed she'd left the state. Her apology email had never been answered. The Mitchell family decided that forgiveness wasn't theirs to give on behalf of all the people Christine had harmed over 22 years. The Mitchell Protocol remained in effect across all major U.S. airlines. In its first year, it had resulted in 93 employee terminations for substantiated discrimination, 347 complaints resolved with meaningful consequences, and a measurable decrease in racial profiling incidents, not because racism had disappeared, but because accountability finally existed. Delta's stock had briefly dipped after the scandal but had since reached record highs, proving that doing the right thing and running a profitable business weren't mutually exclusive. As Marcus watched his daughters leave the stage, award in hand, he thought about how much had changed in 1 year, and how much hadn't. Racism still existed. Children of color still faced discrimination. But now there were systems in place to fight back. Voices that refused to stay silent. Consequences that actually meant something. His daughters had lost their innocence but gained their power. And maybe that trade-off, unfair as it was, would ultimately protect the next generation from having to make the same sacrifice. Now it's your turn to reflect and engage. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can truly end, or will they always exist in different forms? What do you believe needs to happen in airlines, schools, workplaces, everywhere, to curb this poison that's infected our society for generations? Do you think serving justice to individual racists like Christine Dalton is enough, or does the entire system need dismantling and rebuilding from the ground up? More importantly, what would you have done in Sage, Skylar, and Sienna's position? Would you have had the courage to speak up, go public, face the scrutiny and criticism? And what about as a passenger on Flight 2156? Would you have intervened when Christine grabbed those girls, or would you have been one of the people recording but staying silent? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about times you've witnessed discrimination. What did you do? What do you wish you'd done differently? If you want racism to become a thing of the past in our country and world at large, if you want to be like Sage, Skylar, Sienna, and Marcus Mitchell, using your voice, demanding accountability, refusing to let discrimination hide behind policies and procedures, then share this video with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can amplify these stories. Together, we can create systems where children don't need CEO parents to get justice. Together, we can build a world where 12-year-old girls can visit their baby cousin without being terrorized for the color of their skin. Hit that like button if you stand for equality and human dignity. Drop your experiences and opinions in the comments. And subscribe to stay connected to more stories that expose injustice and demand change. Thank you for watching the Mitchell family's journey. Thank you for caring enough to make it to the end. And thank you for being part of the solution, because change starts with people like you deciding that enough is enough. The fight isn't over, but together, we're winning. See you in the next story.